Hi there. I'm Randy Patterson, a psychologist in clinical practice, and this is Psychology Salon, a channel about psychological issues. If you like this kind of thing, click subscribe. As I discussed in my last video, I post material on all kinds of human challenges on this channel, but few of these are as universal as grief and loss. Grief is the price of love, as they say, the price of being human. And because we don't talk about it much, it's easy to feel lost in grief, or like you're not doing it right, or like the grief has exposed something about you and your essential defectiveness. So learning a little about grief is valuable, I think, for just about everyone. I started out with this series thinking that I would call it the stages of grief. Basically a bait and switch, because then I would tell the truth, which is that stage theories are always lies. Human beings are complicated. We go back and forth. It's not like a triathlon where once you've done the swim, that's it. You're never going to go back in the water again. With grief, you think you've done something and are on to the next thing, only to wake up and find yourself sinking back in the pool. So one of the first things I'd like to say is not to get too caught up in the sequence. Okay, that's over. I never have to experience that again. We tend to loop around, and that's completely normal because so much of it is painful. Our instinct can be to close off to it, block it, and much of the mission is to open to it instead. This is what I'm feeling this morning. Well, okay, here we are. The more eager we are to jump out of the fire into the next step or stage, the more we tend to slow things down or make things even more complicated. It's more helpful to accept what we're feeling, allow it to be there, not try to box it up in the back closet somewhere. There might be moments, say in the bank lineup, where you very deliberately shut it down or tuck it away. Not now, if you can. Or I'm driving and I need to pay attention. So all of that said, today I'm going to discuss an experience that happens most often early after a loss. And like the others, this is an adaptation of the tasks of mourning discussed by William Worden in his great book, Grief Counselling and Grief Therapy. Strongly recommended for therapists. He labels it Task 1, to accept the reality of the loss. Well, that sounds very cut and dried. Move on. Next. But there's more to it than it sounds. If you've had a loss, it means that for some time, this person has been in your life. In the case of a parent, for example, your entire experience since birth has been of a planet that has them on it. They're like the sky or gravity. They've always been there. They are a fundamental feature of the world. Or maybe it's a spouse, someone you've been with for some time. Maybe the last time you lived without knowing them, you were 10 years younger, or 20, or 50 years younger. That wasn't you. That was a different person. You have changed in the time you've been with your partner, adapted to them. You are yourself, but they are a part of you and of your life. What is this world that they are not in? Who are you in a world that they have departed? Maybe it's a child. You changed yourself to become what you have been ever since. You became a parent. And who are you now? How can a world that you built precisely to include them not have them in it? Sometimes we lose people we haven't had long. The stories of a bride or bridegroom passing away on the honeymoon, or a stillbirth, or a miscarriage. Much of the relationship is a future we have built with them, in our minds or otherwise, a future that seemed very solid, something you can rely on. And that's been lost. These kinds of losses can have a special kind of pain because others may not really understand. Oh, but you hadn't known him for very long. Oh, but that child, you never got to meet them. They don't see that future that never got to happen, or that bond that had already developed. In a world of 8 billion people, one leaves, and it becomes a world that we don't quite recognize. It doesn't feel real. Sometimes it's the world itself that doesn't feel real. This cataclysmic event has taken place, and look outside. There are people walking to work, children playing down the street. The garbage truck has arrived. Nothing has changed, as though everyone is pretending that they still live on the same planet as yesterday. But it's not the same. It's fundamentally different. And no one seems to realize it. This existence of fast food outlets and board games and grocery stores and vacuum cleaners and subways suddenly doesn't make any sense. And the only person who sees that is you. It's like you're in some kind of weird stage play. You're pretending to look through the doors in this English country house waiting to be served tea, but it's not an English country house. None of it is real. There's no wall on one side, just a bunch of people sitting in theater seats. So the world feels unreal. And whether you get that sensation or not, you're almost certain to have at least some of the other type. The loss doesn't seem real. They tell you it's happened. Maybe you saw it happen or thought you did. But it's such a fundamental change that can't have happened, can it? Look around. Everything else is the same. There's no cracks in the earth, same pictures on the walls. It can't have happened. Sometimes a person will just flat out deny that it happened. They didn't pass away. They moved. They live in Uganda or someplace. They're coming back. Much more often, there is this sense that you just can't quite emotionally connect with the reality. Intellectually, you know the truth. But you may not feel anything. For some people, there are no tears. Just this odd sense of stunned normality. And for some people, it's tempting to wonder, what kind of person am I? I don't feel a thing. Am I a monster? Did I care about them at all? Was I just kidding myself? What's going on? The brain seems to be a little bit like your house. Somewhere hidden inside, there's a circuit breaker panel. And when something too big surges through, that throws the switch and it breaks the link. And the emotions shut off. Some people experience this in a near accident on the freeway. This calm coldness comes over them and they just do what needs to be done, even though they're in great danger. It's not courage, which is acting in spite of your feelings. Here, there may be no feelings. The circuit breaker has flipped. We think we live in the real world, but actually we live inside our heads. When someone passes, there are two worlds in here. There's one where the person is still alive, and another where they're not. And we can automatically flip from one to the other. You wake up from a nap and you're in the version where none of this has ever happened. And then your brain switches tracks, and you remember. And sometimes the feelings may come with that, sometimes not. You'll slide into that more familiar world a bunch of times, riding the bus, working, exercising, talking with a friend, and then suddenly you remember. the world shifts and you're in the other one, the one you don't like as much. When therapists see people going through grief, some of the help they give is slow and gradual. Occasionally, it can be big and sudden. For some people, learning that this flickering or shifting is normal is a big revelation, because for them, the shifting has been a sign that they're losing their mind, or that they don't care, or that they're dementing because they keep forgetting that the person has died. Sometimes it's behavior that triggers this worry. They're making dinner and they set a place for the person who isn't there. Or they call them. Lunch is... They have a thought and they turn to share it with that person. Or they listen for their car in the driveway when they should know it's not coming. The brain has a lot of space set aside for that important relationship, and it's not getting activated because that person isn't there. And there's an automatic looking and searching response because they've been taken from you. And one way that this can come out is in sensory hallucinations or near hallucinations. You look out at a crowd and you catch sight of them. And you look again and you can't find them. You could swear they were right there. Or you hear their voice in another room and you go to look and nothing. These kinds of experiences really convince some people that they're losing their minds. And it's often so helpful to realize that they're actually quite common experiences. The mission is not to stamp them out. It's just to recognize that for at least some people, they're part of the experience. They don't mean very much about you. And of course, some people will hear about these things and think, wait a minute, that's never happened to me. Maybe I'm not grieving right. Maybe I didn't really care. Maybe the fact that it always seemed real means they just weren't significant enough to me to throw my circuit breaker. Relax. Breathe. This is not about how important they were, or whether you loved them, or how much. It's just something that happens. It's the result of a complex interaction of factors, and it's neither predictable nor diagnostic of anything. One of the problems in grief is that people try to force themselves into a particular channel. First this, then this, then this. And what we try to do in therapy is to help them open to the process, however it is, and not resist it, because it's not what they think they're supposed to be thinking or feeling or doing. It's the belief that grief is a certain thing that can sometimes cause it to get stuck. So, task 1, to accept the reality of the loss. How does that happen? The main answer to that is time. That circuit breaker, if it throws, does so to avoid flooding the system. It's a response to shock. As the shock passes, the channel opens bit by bit, and it begins to seem more real. Yes, this coffee cup still exists, and it's in a world, a real world, where that person has passed, and they have passed. It's true. The thing that I would really prefer not to be true is true. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to approve. I don't have to embrace it. I just have to open myself to a world where this truth is true. A second strategy for acceptance is to overcome avoidance. We can pretend that something isn't true by avoiding any sign that it is. We might not help in planning for a ceremony, for example. Or we might drive far out of our way to avoid passing the hospital where it happened. Or we might tuck our sympathy cards out of sight if we have some. We might avoid all mention that that person ever existed in the first place, putting away their photos, shutting off their room, making a point never to talk about the loss. Some people immediately pack up all those belongings, get rid of them instantly. Didn't happen, move on. Some people immediately sell the home and move to another place or race into a new relationship, trying to stitch closed that wound as fast as they can. Others engage in what William Worden calls mummification. They preserve everything associated with the person they've lost. Their room becomes a commemorative museum. Everything just as they left it, as though one day there will be a knock at the door and they will return to that life, picking up the reins as though they were never gone. Queen Victoria famously had Prince Albert's clothes laid out for him every morning for years after his death. This is a kind of denial of painful reality. The thing about pain is, the more you run away from it, the worse it tends to get in the long run. So neither racing to get back to normal, nor preserving the museum of the lost is the path. Then what is? As is so often true in life, it's somewhere in the mushy middle, dealing with things as they come up, letting some things go, guided not by a specific timetable, but a sense that the time has come. Able to state the truth and live according to that truth. No need for a place at the table. No need to lay out the clothes for the day. It can come naturally and usually does. Where it doesn't, a therapist can sometimes help. Okay, so that's one of the tasks of mourning, to overcome that sense of unreality and allow the new world to solidify around us. A world where the person who has passed has passed. What's the second task? It's to experience the pain of grief. And I'll talk about that in the next video. There are other videos on this channel on the psychology of everyday life. Click the subscribe button for more. I also have an online course site, psychologysalon.teachable.com, with programs for professionals and for the general public. And my guide, The Assertiveness Workbook, is available from bookstores and online booksellers. Thanks for watching.